Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Did many of you come this afternoon to the Sovereign Harbour? I can see a few faces. Well, fantastic. Your stamina, I really admire. This evening we have Janice Atkinson and we have Alan Stevens as our two speakers. Janice is number 2 on the MEP list and a very successful businesswoman and a recent, been a member of UKIP just a few years. Alan Stevens is all the way from Buckinghamshire, won a seat on Buckinghamshire County Council in May 2013 and a financial specialist, I'm told. I think I'll call upon Alan Stevens first to address you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much everyone for coming to listen to us. It's a rather nice evening as well. I think this is probably the nicest backdrop I've actually had the English Channel on any of these public meetings. As explained, yes, I'm indeed from Buckinghamshire. I joined UKIP in 2010 when we had David Cameron give the country his cast iron guarantee that there was going to be a referendum should he become Prime Minister. So one can be forgiven for a certain sense of déjà vu when we are once again facing an election in a year's time where he's made the same promise. Well, it seems to work last time, he thought. Of course, it didn't work for him. And I think the fact that he didn't carry his promise through and so clearly was being unreliable about it is one of the reasons he didn't win the election. And certainly a major reason why a lot of people joined UKIP, actually. So we always say that David Cameron was one of our great recruiting sergeants. Anyway, so I stood for UKIP in 2010. And essentially things sort of continued really after a not particularly encouraging election until 2013 when we had this enormous upsurge in UKIP's fortunes, which I personally ascribe to a mixture of people seeing how bad things are in Europe and people realising that there's serious trouble here and that the political establishment, all the main parties, don't really know what to do about it. Haven't got any ideas. I mean, we contributed quite a few ideas to the policies that are now being implemented in some cases, some of the better ones. For example, the policy of getting people on minimum wage out of income tax was a UKIP policy. So we do contribute quite a few ideas to the debate. And in fact, we're holding off presenting our Westminster 2015 manifesto in an effort really to keep our own ideas, actually. Otherwise, they'll be stealing them again. Anyway, so I think the fact we've got ideas the others don't, and the fact that the others are failing in Europe and failing here, is the thing that's really supporting UKIP and leading it on to success. I'm very encouraged by prospects. I was personally amazed to be voted for Great Missenden, which is an extremely blue village, as it were, in Buckinghamshire. It was partly because of HS2, which is an absolutely dreadful scheme to spend at least £50 billion building a railway that makes absolutely no difference. I think they've now reduced the design speed on HS2 such that it's going to be 10 minutes faster to Birmingham, assuming you happen to live by one of the stations. And I think it won't be long before it's no minutes faster, actually, the way that lot are going. And the only thing, the relevance of this, of course, to you is that everyone in this room is going to pay £1,000 towards it, which is very good of you. Why it is that the government, which has preached austerity, feels it can spray £1,000 ahead over the next 10 years for fun on a whole pile of foreign contractors building a useless railway, I don't know. But it's one of the signs that I think they've lost the plot. And I think that's what we're picking up on. And once again, UKIP is a party that represents most people's views. About 60-something% of the population wants HS2 scrapped or deferred, and yet we're the only party opposing it. So more or less the usual situation. Janice and I have both done quite a few of these meetings now. In fact, we've both done one today already. I think we're very encouraged by what's happening in this election. We were very encouraged indeed by the 2 debates that Nigel Farage had with Nick Clegg, and they've sort of formed part of the pattern, the way that these conversations go, depending on the audience. So I thought what I'd do is just go through some of the things that are being said against us, point out what the, how much progress or otherwise those arguments make, and then possibly raise things that you'll want to ask questions about. So I think the best part of these sessions is always the Q&A after the speeches, actually. Right, the very noticeable part of Nick Clegg's first attack was 3 million jobs. In politics, people come up with very short expressions designed to concern the opposition. The loss of 3 million jobs is one of them. This, of course, is a figure based on a year 2000, I think, estimate of the number of people in toto involved in trade of some kind with Europe or with the EU. And in fact, the figure has actually now gone up. The thing that's dishonest about this, as Nigel pointed out in the debate, it is dishonest, is that for you to actually lose 3 million jobs, or even any, you have to assume that Europe is suddenly going to be not trading with Britain at all. It'll be trading with China and America, Russia, of course, which are not members of the EU. We're trading with Switzerland, which of course does more business per head than we do with the EU. But for some reason, there'll be this sort of offshore island which has no trade with the EU. This is obviously preposterous for a number of reasons, and one of the things we have to do is point out why that is. The first thing, of course, is that we are a huge importer, relatively speaking, of goods from the EU. We run an enormous balance of trade deficit with the EU. We have a rapidly expanding and much less unbalanced trade with the rest of the world. It's no longer really true that half our business is with the EU anyway. It's obviously inconceivable that the EU would start a fight which would wipe out effectively the biggest part of its balance of trade surplus. In particular, of course, we are a huge importer of German cars and German equipment generally, and I think any effort to cause trouble in the event of separation between England and the continent would simply result in a call from the German motor manufacturers insisting on a free trade agreement between England and the EU. So there's nothing at all to worry about that. The EU is a jobs destroyer. One of the arguments that works very well with, for example, university and school audiences, in particular, is look, most of southern Europe has got 50% youth unemployment. 25% overall unemployment in Italy and Spain. A little known statistic is that Italy apparently its industrial production has fallen down to 1970s level. It's a most extraordinary disaster. Absolutely catastrophic, and it's the result of this ludicrous EU project, the euro, and also grievous over-regulation at EU and national level. So it's easy to depict the EU as a job destroyer, particularly when you remember how many jobs have been destroyed in fisheries, particularly in this country, in small businesses that have been removed by regulations foisted on us by effectively a crony capitalist elite based in Brussels. So on the economic side, I think we're seeing the end of this 3 million scare story, because it's clear to everyone that our future really, as a trading nation, would be much better. We were much better off if we were aligned with the rest of the world, and we don't really face any danger from the Europeans, who are going to, apart from anything else, become less and less important. The European Union's economy is just not growing at all. It's becoming an ever smaller portion of the world's economy. I think in 20 or so years, it's expected that it will be only 15% of the world economy anyway. And it's not really something that we want to be attached to. And I think, certainly I'm very keen to tell younger people that their future prosperity will probably lie, will be connected with things that are outside Europe. I certainly suspect that's the case. So that's sort of the economic argument and jobs and so on. And we haven't heard that one so much. So I think people have realised the 3 million figure is unsustainable and incorrect and misleading. The next attack is something, and there's got this word's come out these last 2 weeks. We've had isolation. We've had England will be isolated. That's the idea here, is that the world's 6th biggest economy, which has connections, of course, with the Commonwealth and the rest of the English-speaking world, has a seat on the UN Security Council, all the rest of it, will somehow be isolated if it's no longer represented by Van Rompuy and Baroness Ashton and all these other people who no one ever elected, and are flying around in Brussels and so on, trying to run Britain for us. Nick Clegg mentioned this figure a number of times, this idea a number of times, isolation. I've had it today. The whole thing is ludicrous. The problem with our European link is that it's tending to isolate us, if that's the word, from the rest of the world. And the key point here is that you do not have to be part of a political union to cooperate with it. The opposition, the pro-EU arguments all depend on, if you were not part of the EU, you could not do this. This is the argument, right? It is not true. We had another example of this from Nick Clegg. He said, well, we wouldn't be able to extradite criminals if we weren't in the EU, overlooking the fact that we have extradition treaties with huge numbers of other countries. I thought that was peculiarly moving, really, because of course the EU version of extradition is this thing called the European Arrest Warrant, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. What this means is that anybody in any other court, including in Eastern Europe and Greece and so on, can, and do, by the way, issue warrants for the arrest of a British person. The British police have to arrest them, and they have to basically ensure that they're then cast off to these countries, where on a number of occasions people have sat in Greek and Bulgarian jails for years without being charged, because these places do not have the same standards. Now, under a normal extradition treaty, which we no longer have with Europe, you can't extradite somebody unless there's a prima facie case. In other words, the country extraditing proves that an offence has occurred and demonstrates that it's reasonable to suppose that the person who is being extradited did it. With the wonders of the European Union arrest warrants, this no longer applies. So what we have here is a rather unsuccessful type of cooperation, really, we'd rather like the kind that goes on between independent countries all the time. So the next one to come out is almost the desperate last card, is war, where we're told that however bad the EU is, it has nevertheless resulted in there being no warfare. To which our response is very much, well, peace is being kept by NATO particularly, and I'm afraid by the presence of atomic weapons and by the profound desire of the French and the Germans not to have a go at each other again, and not by the EU. But as you watch the EU develop into a very large federal state, which is what it wants to do, it's starting to interfere in things beyond its borders. And this, I think it's relevant that there was a discussion in the first debate with Nick Clegg and Nigel Farage about Ukraine. Today at Canterbury University I had a question about the Middle East, where the EU is also putting large sums of money into various factions there. The concern has to be that if the EU develops proactively more or less amounts to intention to have a foreign policy and have an armed force to back it up, then this is going to perhaps result in Britain being involved in conflict which it wouldn't otherwise get involved in. So that's the last tier of the argument, really. Certainly, I remember when I was campaigning in 2010, I did meet people who had, one or two, who had actually fought in the Second World War, and that was still a powerful argument for them, and I do quite understand that, actually. But I think that as Europe gets more and more ambitious, I'm not sure how the balance of advantage lies there, and I think that membership of NATO, as a purely defensive alliance, which it should go back to being, is the solution on that one as well. The thing that we haven't been hearing about is immigration, actually, but I wanted to mention that because nationally I think it's quite important. We are a party which attracts support from people who used to belong to all the other parties, much more evenly than one was supposed. I mean, clearly in different areas there are more Conservatives or more Labour people, but nationally we are much more like a national party. We are present in the north of England in a way that the Conservatives often are not. We are present in the south of England in a way that the Labour Party usually is not. Which one of the reasons we get an extraordinarily large number of second places, for example, in these council elections. We are a genuinely national party that's on the rise and trying to restore Britain's independence and democracy and so on. One of the things that appeals to Labour supporters, but I should appeal to everyone, is the fact that we have, as a result of being in the EU, we have a policy of uncontrolled immigration. And I don't think it's right to avoid this issue. We have a policy which means that you can't let in extremely talented people from other countries, or at least it's much harder to get them in. But you can, everybody who comes from the EU, no matter how unskilled, frankly, is allowed in and is allowed to compete with our own unskilled labour and is allowed to start claiming the whole range of tax credits and housing and all that sort of thing. And this is being skated over continuously, but for, I think, everybody, but I think also Labour supporters in particular. They think of the country as almost like a huge friendly society. Remember the things where people were chipping in and getting benefits out, and they see people coming in and they are obviously lowering wage rates. I mean, the standard of living in this country has fallen. Average incomes from employment have fallen quite a lot, and part of this has to be down to immigration, at least part of it. And they're finding that these people are also getting benefits for which they haven't paid. And in general terms, not actually adding to the sum of their happiness or indeed national production and so on. So that is a very real concern, I think. The EU experiment is just basically losing touch with reality. It is being accompanied by economic distress in Europe and here. And I think more and more people would certainly like an effective reworking of the relationship with Europe. And we're, at UKIP, we're very much in favour of active cooperation with Europe. We just don't think we have to be part of their political union. On that note, I will defer to Janice Atkinson to say a few words, and then we'll have questions and answers.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for those that came along to the meeting earlier. I hope I don't bore you too much if I say the same thing. I'm very sorry. But another wonderful backdrop here in Eastbourne. Alan's absolutely right. The argument is going to be on the economy and jobs when we get our referendum. And he's absolutely right about the 3.5 million jobs lie. He's just shown me a leaflet that was being handed out in Canterbury today, and I think their leaflet, the Lib Dems leaflet, has gone to print before the last debate with Nigel, because if you remember, Nick was actually trotting out the 3.5 million jobs line. And we've nailed that. And if you listen to their rhetoric in the past week to 10 days, they just say it's jobs now, because we've nailed the 3.5 million jobs line. As Alan says, it was a 2000 report that actually all three parties trot this line out on. And even the author of the report called it pure Goebbels. And he said, actually, it's not even 3.5 million jobs. It's possibly 4 million jobs. But they're not UK jobs. They're actually jobs that are reliant on the EU trading with us. So when we have our referendum, it's going to come down to two things, and we're very strong on this. Another thing that comes up is the debt versus deficit. There's a big disconnect that politicians keep peddling. A few weeks ago, I was saying that we've got a £1 trillion debt. We actually haven't. It's gone up to £1.4 trillion debt. And there is this complete disconnect that they'll try and pull the wool over your eyes. And I was at another public meeting last night in Whitstable, and somebody said to me, you're the party of fairness, aren't you? It's like common sense. And that person was not a member of UKIP. They hadn't read anything about us, and they just said, when Nigel Farage and the rest of you stand up, it's all about common sense and fairness, because we don't feel that the other parties are fair and there's no common sense. And I said, well, I think that comes down to the personalities that are now involved in politics. So if you look at the Lib Lab Con front bench, they've all been to elite universities, they've all been to elite schools, they go straight into working as researchers in Parliament or for an MEP, and then they go straight into Parliament, or they become MEPs. And they have got a disconnect with the public because they've never actually done proper jobs. You know, Cameron has never been employed. He had 6 months with a job doing a PR job with ITV that his mother got him. Miliband has never had a job. Nick Clegg has only ever been in politics. And these people have the audacity to think that actually they can make laws and run our lives for us, and they can't. And I think that's what the difference is with UKIP, because if you look at the list from the South East, there's 10 MEPs that go from the South East to represent you. And if you look at the UKIP list, you've got Nigel, then you've got me, then there's 3 other women, then there's the men. I think in total there's about 3 or 4 women, and the rest are men. When we get, I was up against the Labour woman for this area a couple of weeks ago on BBC Radio Oxford, and she's been a politics student. Then she was a politics lecturer, and she's never actually had a job. But she wants to represent you, and she's gone straight to the top of the Labour list because she's an all-woman shortlist. She's a gender quota. Now, I can't take her seriously. She may be a fantastic politician, but again, she's never had a proper job. And then I stood on a platform down in Kent, and I had to address 200 pensioners, and I tell you, it was frightening, because they've all led lives, they've all paid taxes, they've brought up their kids, they've educated them, they've used the NHS. There's nothing that you can't tell a pensioner. So to me, that's a more frightening audience than going on BBC Question Time with David Dimbleby. So that we were standing there, and I was up against my opponent. So I had Anthony Hook, who's number 2 on the Lib Dems list. I had the Green MEP, there was me, then I had a Labour chap, and I had the Conservative. And again, they're all much younger than me, they'd probably give me 15 years. But each one of them had never had a proper job. They'd all gone to the elite schools, the elite universities, and these people think they can stand and represent us. And the pensioners gave them a really hard time, because the Lib Dem is sitting there trotting out the lies, and this was in between the 2 debates. And they just kept coming back to him and saying, "No, sorry, Anthony, you're completely wrong on that, and I'll tell you why." And the more I said this to him, the more he got angry, and the more I laughed. And these pensioners were baying. It was like watching, you know, the old-fashioned sort of 70s wrestling matches. It was a bit like that. And the more I laughed and became more relaxed, the more angry he got. And they get really angry because they're on the way down. You know, they've only got 12 MEPs left in the South East. We hope to, sorry, not in the South East, across the country. Now, we hope to knock them out. And we spoke earlier about influence in Europe, and one of the gentlemen said, what's really our influence over there? What will you do when you get there? And I said, well, UKIP MEPs will be going over there to say no to every single piece of legislation that comes across our desk. But what we'll do, and what we're accused of not doing, is we propose our own legislation. Now, the reality is there's no hope of getting it through, because you know it's actually decided at European Commission level by unelected bureaucrats, and if you've ever watched the voting that goes on in the EU, it's like working in the city with you're just betting on stuff the whole time. They have no idea what they're actually passing legislation on. If you saw the programme that Nigel Farage was on Channel 4, Who is Nigel Farage, a couple of weeks ago, they're just sitting there pressing buttons. They have no idea. All they're doing is pushing this stuff through. And another Lib Dem lie, it's about 7% of our laws actually come from Brussels. That's total nonsense. And again, the report that they quote, it's a 2010 report. And in the report, it actually says, actually, even we can't calculate how much law has come over from the EU. But we know, because Viviane Reding, the EU Commissioner, was over here a few weeks ago, who told us we were too stupid to have and make our own minds up on the EU, because it's very dangerous giving our people the vote, because we'd probably vote to come out, so we weren't intelligent enough to weigh up the arguments. And even she stood there and said, 70% of our laws come from the EU, so why would you believe Nick Clegg? And there was a German study back in the year 2000 that actually said that they thought it was about 84% of the laws come from Brussels. So it comes back to what influence we have. Well, we have very little influence, because the 73 MEPs that we send from Britain over to the EU have 8.4% influence. There are 760 or 33 MEPs. And we only have 8.4% of the votes, because they have qualified voting majority. That means that they all block together. And there was a report out a couple of weeks ago where the Council of Ministers, of which Cameron is part of, he tried vetoing, all the governments, the successive governments and prime ministers from this country have tried vetoing certain pieces of legislation going through, and 55 times we've been said no, it's not going to happen. So I promise you, when I get there, because barring any disasters, on 22nd of May, because we've always had 2 MEPs in the South East, I'm going to Brussels. And I promise you, I will work hard saying no to everything, proposing our own legislation, but using influence and money to establish a fighting force in the South East to ensure that we actually have our referendum. Also, when I became an MEP candidate, I said to Nigel, we don't actually recognise this homogenous half donut that's called the South East, which has been produced by the EU. So I said, why don't we go back to a county system? That's what everybody recognises. That's what we base our democracy on, our county councils and our ward structures. So why don't we go back to doing that? It's a good idea. So it's okay, I'll take Kent. And then I'm looking after part of East Sussex as well. And we've got Donna Edmonds here, and across it goes to Surrey. And we've got 2 great people there, Diane James, you probably know, and Ray Finch, who works for Nigel. He's looking after Hampshire. And we're holding about 70 public meetings across the South East. And we're the only party that's actually doing this. We're the only party going out and meeting people. The other parties, they'll hide behind a hustings and they'll bust their own people in. We haven't said this evening, this is a closed meeting. It's not. I don't know how many of you are UKIP members. I hope there's people from outside. At last night's Whitstable meeting, I had about 60 people there. And I say probably about 50% were people that had never gone to a public meeting before, or they can remember because their parents did in the 70s. And it's only us that's actually bringing this back now. And it's the voice of common sense. And it's quite funny because you'll know the debacle of Maria Miller resigning this morning. Well, we've got a public meeting that was scheduled for weeks over in Basingstoke. Well, guess who's going there this evening? Nigel Farage. So Nigel is going there this evening. It's going to be on the 6 o'clock news. It was embargoed. But he's going to ask for recall of Parliament to actually have an in-depth cleansing of what's going on with the MP's expenses. And he's going to call on Miller to resign, and so that we can have a by-election. But they won't have the courage to do that. But again, it's us that's driving the agenda, whether it's immigration, whether it's foreign aid, or whatever it is, it's us that's driving it. And we're driving the other parties' policies as well, and they're running scared of us. Yesterday I was in Kent, and I had the Swedish broadcast company, so the equivalent of the BBC, it was their state broadcast company. And he said, Janice, it's very nice to meet you, and because we've got a party like you in Sweden, and we're really interested. And I said, well, it's just not you, it's the Italians and the French and the Germans as well. We've done so much foreign media. And I said, so where did you go today? He said, Tunbridge Wells. And I said, that conservative bastion of Tunbridge Wells, disgusted of Tunbridge Wells. So how did you get on? And he said, couldn't find a single Conservative voter. I said, I know you're from Sweden, you've just got off the plane. He said, I was based here for years. He was in part of the lobby. So he told me the roads that he'd got to in Tunbridge Wells. I said, wow, that is real Conservative territory. I said, are you just winding me up? He said, no, we could find no Conservative voters. Oh. Labour voters? No. Lib Dems, who are they? I said, did you find some UKIP voters? Oh yeah, they're all voting for you, which is really interesting. And then there was another, so I can talk about Kent because there's an awful lot going over on in Kent, and I'm looking after Kent. So there was another poll at the weekend done by Survation, who were quite friendly to us. And folks, they did a poll in Folkestone High. You may remember that that's Michael Howard's old constituency, and at times his majority went down to 5,000. Now they've got a guy in there that's Conservative, and he's got a 10,000 majority, but that means nothing because all the marginal seats are around about 10,000. They can swing back and forth between Labour and Conservative in Kent. And that poll at the weekend showed that the Conservative was on 36%, and we were on 33%. And then they did another one in South Thanet that showed that the Tories couldn't win there, and actually that resulted in the Tory candidate, or the Tory MP, Laura Sands, standing down. And now there's the fight between us, and it will be Labour. And so I was on the streets of Ramsgate the other week, and I said, so who are you going to vote for? Well, we're not voting Tory. No, that's not going to happen. So are you going to vote Labour? No, we're probably going to vote UKIP. I said, well, you know who the opposition is? Well, it's Labour, isn't it? Yeah, it's Labour. I said, so are you happy that Labour have chosen a 24-year-old young man to be their PPC? I said, and that man, again, has never worked in a real job. He's only ever worked in the Labour Party. He's only ever worked for his parents. He's never had a job. He's just a councillor down there. There's nothing wrong with being a councillor, but you can see where I'm coming from. The Labour Party have selected this boy to fight the general election. So the choice in South Thanet is a grown-up, and hopefully it might be Nigel. I don't know where it's going to stand. Hopefully it'll be Nigel, somebody who's had a proper job, or you can have a 24-year-old kid. I mean, the choice is quite stark now. So, and what we're finding, we did another poll. There was a poll for one of the Medway and Maidstone newspapers, and you may know that Helen Grant was the woman who was parachuted into Maidstone when Anne Widdecombe stood down, and she was an ex-Labour Party member, and Cameron parachuted her in. Useless, she's sports minister, absolutely useless. The Lib Dems have moved in, and they think they're nipping at our heels, but we're not really campaigning. So I've set up a branch there, and it seems to be gaining momentum. We've been on the streets, and we're really, really popular. So the newspaper did a poll between Medway, which is just up the road, and Maidstone. They did one 2 weeks ago. Who are you going to? If there was a general election tomorrow, and this is not the Euro vote, who would you vote for? It was 70% 2 weeks ago in our favour. They did one yesterday. It's now 90%. So do you see that those of you that are members here, there is something fundamentally changing in politics? And even the polls that are showing that don't ask. There's only one company that asks if there was a general election tomorrow, who would you vote for? And they put us in there, so it's the four parties. But when most of the other polling companies like YouGov and Comres just use the three old parties. And when they do, we're still coming third, consistently third all the time, polling 5, 6, maybe 10% more than Liberal Democrats. And when their name is actually put forward, then we're even higher. And I was asked consistently today and yesterday, do you think you can get parliamentary seats? Oh, absolutely, because Nigel and I, and it's not about just Nigel and I, the whole point of doing these meetings is to show you what UKIP is like. You know, we are the faces of UKIP, and dispelling some of those myths and lies that our opposition say about us. But it's not just about me, I want Alan over in Brussels with us. I want Patricia Culligan, who's fantastic. I want Ray Finch as well. Probably Diane James is going to come because the numbers are there. But my job is to work hard to get the message out there so that we've got a really good cohort of people. And when we get there, after May the 22nd, then we'll start declaring the seats that we're going to stand in. But being UKIP, we're all terribly democratic, so we have to go in front of hustings and all that sort of stuff. But I will fight a Kent seat. I'm hoping Nigel will fight a Kent seat. And then our job then is to fight the general election. And it's only by guessing, I know 70%, 84% of our power has been given away. We've lost our sovereignty. But there's still power in Parliament to give us our referendum. So that's the next job. So those of you that are UKIP members, thank you. Work really hard now, up until the 22nd of May. And as soon as that's over, we've got parliamentary seats to fight. I'm on the Policy Review Committee. We've got some fantastic stuff. I've written welfare policy. And then we go on to the general election. So I hope you'll come with us, and I hope you work hard. Work is not over on May the 22nd, then it just starts. Is that all right? Oh, before I sit down, how many former Tories have we got in the room? Hands up. Okay, down. How many former Labour members have we got in here? Oh, no, you're a former Labour person. Okay. And Liberal Democrats? Actually similar to earlier. Any Greens?
No.
No. We do get them. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Okay, question asked. Any question? Could you be kind enough to give your name first and the question, please? Questions?
My name's Ted Carlo. I've been a member since it started, UKIP. I know Nigel very well. This time round with the European MPs, once you're in there and been elected, would there be any way you can make yourself more obvious in the British press and all that? Because lots of people, they don't know who the Euro MPs are. They know Farage because he's well famed. You know, everybody knows he's Nigel and a couple of the others, but they're not known. They seem to lose their soul in the mirage of Brussels, you know. It's sort of, be nice if they can pound through what goes on there across to the British public more than has been done over the years.
Well, the tide has turned in the media anyway. The spotlight has been turned on us. I mean, I'm often in the media, I'm often quoted just as a candidate. I know Gerard Batten is, because he's our spokesman on immigration, so he's gone a bit further up and being quoted as well. Paul Nuttall is often quoted as well because he's deputy leader and has certain interests. But the spotlight has been turned upon us because we are the party that is out. We are the one that's standing out. We're not like the other old parties. But once we're elected, yes, it gives us a platform. And I think if I have a criticism of UKIP, it has been that we haven't had the expertise in the party because we've only got so much money. Once more of us get elected, then we've already got a beefed up press office. We've got Patrick O'Flynn now, who came over, who was political editor of the Daily Express, is a good friend of mine. He's now heading up communications in Brookes Mews in London. And yeah, he was one of the people, the team that trained Nigel to go in front of Nick Clegg, because this was our biggest moment. So we have got a beefed up team. And when I'm elected, I will have a grown-up media person. I won't have a kid. Most people have kids. I won't. I've got a grown-up person that I want to come over and help me. And there's 3 of the other women he works for, because he thinks it would be good fun, because they're all going to stand in key marginals as well. And we are getting more traction in the media. I mean, Nigel's got his column that I think came out today in The Independent. I'm getting more interviews. I've been interviewed in The Times. I was the pastry girl on a Murdoch paper. It was The Times, admittedly. But you know, I've been on Question Time twice now. Diane James has been on Question Time. We've got Margot Parker that's probably going to go on there. You've seen Suzanne Evans, who's brilliant. I mean, she only came over from the Tories a few months ago, and she just sits there and smiles away. She's great. She's taken on cabinet ministers on the Daily Politics show. So we are getting there. And I tell you, I will be shouting loud and clear once I get there.
It was trying to, but once you're in there, still let people...
Yeah, we'll do.
No,
Oh, I promise you.
Yeah, that's what I do.
No, I'm loud.
Okay,
You're going to get in, thanks.
There's another question, please.
I'm John Cheeseman. I'm one of them horrible old pensioners. I am a Conservative. I believe we've had somebody in this country called a government that's been running it since the father of England, Oliver Cromwell. Why do we need another one in Europe running us? We don't.
We don't. Yeah, it's quite right.
It's a story. So there's your old lot.
Well, I think
That's it.
it's definitely a point worth making. It's easy to get bogged down in economics and all the rest of it. But I think certainly when I do these talks, I try to say at least once. I mean, do you think Britain should continue to exist as a country where you can actually get rid of the politicians if you don't like it, which is very much Cromwell's approach. And I think that registers even with younger audiences actually. But it is the key point. Yeah.
But as you're a Conservative, do you think that your leader will give us a referendum? Do you actually trust Constantine Day?
No, he won't. Come on.
No, yes, look, you said you're a Conservative.
I've been a Conservative since I was a young kid, and I'm 80 nearly.
Yeah.
No way would he give us a referendum. They're just blowing over the coals all the time. Of course they won't. They're
You
all
join
scared, they're all
UKIP,
nervous.
sir. You come and join us.
I've joined you, haven't I?
Oh, well, thank you.
No, I mean, look, you've already answered the questions for us all. None of them work, none of them know what work is. We need more ground people that know what life's all about. This is what we need in this country, because we're one of the greatest countries on the planet, but we are losing it, and you know we're losing it. We've got to fight for it.
Absolutely.
I'm an ex-teacher, I think. One of the things that concerns me is what you said, that after this election, you're going to develop policies. Yeah?
We've already got them, but they're under wraps.
Exactly. All that we hear at the moment is inquiries and the whatever it is, thing running up north. No one actually at the moment talks about actually doing anything about new industries, because if we're out of that lot, we can actually then develop our industries, I presume. Like shipbuilding, what I mentioned. One of the things that we'd never hear of is it's all very well having that new railway going up north. We've already got several new railways and new motorways, is the south coast. If any of you, I'm sure all of us have been on the M25, traffic coming up from the tunnel, going along the M25, blocking that up and then coming down again. If we had a policy of building a decent road and rail going south, all that would be unnecessary, and it's very high price. Plus the fact of the need for us to build our own ships, our own railways, our own cars, our own aeroplanes, etc., etc. And I presume you're going to have a very strong economic policy. And I'll sit down and shut up, because I've said too much.
Well, certainly, one of the points that springs to mind about this is actually the EU energy policy, because when you said, well, let's think about the new industries we're going to get, I was thinking, well, there's 2 aluminium smelters that have closed down because of EU carbon dioxide alarmism, really, and also, for that matter, the odd steel mill and so on. I mean, even the European commissioners, one of them actually said the other day that Europe was laying the foundations for an industrial massacre with its determination to make using energy as expensive as possible. And it's not just, of course, bad for manufacturing, but also very bad for people living in fuel poverty. And it's a major plank in this election from our point of view, and it's almost entirely attributable to the EU, although in this case the Prime Minister has insisted on gold plating it as well. Yes, and of course in some industries would come back, like fisheries, for example, where we had over half the fishery stock, as it were, and it's now been largely wiped out. So that's another opportunity for us. I think that in a free country, and one that is not relying so heavily on regulation, new industries will arise, and I think that certainly projects like HS2 are a good demonstration of the way in which we've been throwing money around on, in this case, on the basis that it is European. I mean, again, actually, they've got a lot of European suppliers, and one of the reasons is because the British government has a commitment to do something about, in the context of a trans-European network directive from or plan from some 10 years ago or more. They have to do something. It's not clear whether anything very bad would happen to the UK government if they didn't do it, but this is at least partly driving HS2, and of course because it's high speed, because it's high speed but it doesn't get there any quicker for reasons. But I mean, because it has to be high speed, it has to use all the technology the French and others have developed. It's wholly unsuited to our island. The decision to spend 50 billion on the high-speed link is in fact a decision not to spend 50 billion on our infrastructure and roads and so on. And having taken 2 hours to get from Canterbury to here, I can think of at least one area around here that could do with more roads investment if it's permissible, certainly.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, you've probably heard the sad news that Manston Airport is probably going to close, and we've been backing Manston in Kent. And in fact, Nigel and I are going to make a statement on this tomorrow. There seems to be a complete and utter inertia. It's been UKIP's policy to transfer freight into Manston. I mean, Manston is part of Thanet. It's one of the highest deprived areas in Europe and in Britain. The unemployment rate has gone through the roof. So the MP has been like sort of startled rabbit, and nobody's allowed to say anything. Unite Union wants to have a buyout. There's loads of politics around it, but to us it's quite simple, and I've had Brussels working on it today, some of our bright researchers, so we're going to have an announcement tomorrow, but we think we can create 20,000 jobs there. So watch this space. What's interesting about that is that Cameron's going on Radio Kent tomorrow because we've got an election coming up. Nigel's on at 11:45, so I said I'll have the brief for Manston for you straight tomorrow morning. We're also, you mentioned warships. We're building some of our warships in Korea, and even the Defence Minister, Anna Soubry, the attack dog that was on from the Conservative Party, that was on Question Time with Nigel the other week, he pointed out we've now got warships being made in Korea. And that is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the people that lost their jobs in our shipbuilding yards down in Portsmouth that went north just because there's another referendum coming up and there's a big political row. It's to keep the Scots on side. There's a better way of doing that. We didn't have to lose those highly skilled jobs down in Portsmouth. And another one of the lies that the Lib Dems, and to a degree the Conservatives and Labour use as well, is about car manufacturing. You know, the car manufacturers, we've got our manufacturing base back in cars that we lost in the 70s because we were such a basket case. And they would say, well, we'll lose, you know, hundreds of thousands of jobs and investment if we pull out of the EU. That's absolute rubbish. Apart from 2 car companies, so the one is Honda and the other one is Nissan, most of our cars that are manufactured in this country are actually exported. Over 55% are exported outside of the EU. So, you know, we are doing great things in this country. The Germans are not going to stop trading with us. Porsche, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Siemens, the French are not going to stop trading with us, so that's nailing another lie, and we can build on that because we are exporting, we've got the Commonwealth that we can carry on exporting outside of it. And it comes down to jobs as well, part of this. How do we educate our children? At the moment we're importing people. We're building new nuclear power stations. We're having to import people from China and France to do that because we haven't been educating our children to do that. At the top of the engineering business in this country, there are thousands of jobs, 6-figure jobs, over £100,000 a year, which we're not training our kids to do because there is this big disconnect, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've been a teacher, there's a big disconnect in this country of what we're educating our children to do and educating them in, and what actually industry wants. And that's a common sense policy. So industry has, and I think Miliband was saying this in a week, and I'm sorry Mr Miliband, but under your lot, we had 13 years of Labour rule where we could have actually reformed our education system. You didn't, you tinkered at the edges. The Conservatives are just limited to the ideological free schools. They don't seem to be working, and I think ideologically I would have been pro-free schools, but they're not working. We would go back to grammar schools. We would also have like technical schools, vocational schools, like the Germans have. You know, and there is nothing wrong in having. There is not. In this country, everybody thinks they can have an elite education because little Johnny and Sally are so clever, they've got to go off and get knowledge from a second-rate university. And again, we've got to stop thinking that we just send 50% of our kids into university to come out with useless degrees, like media studies degrees. In my business, I don't touch anybody that's got a media studies degree. The BBC, who is very elitist in this country, does not employ anybody with a media studies degree. It's on-the-job training media. It's very simple. That's why I make part of my money. in marketing and media. It's on-the-job training. Golf management is on-the-job training. You know, you can go through those jobs. So industry has to engage, and we have to give them tax incentives to do it. And we've got to, and I have no problem with immigration, importing nuclear scientists, because we haven't got them at all. But we've got to start training our own youngsters for the jobs and the growth that we need to pull this country out of the EU, become a sovereign state, and become an independent country that is rich and powerful again.
Clive?
Yes, Clive Hickman. I'm the PPC for Hove and Portslade, and in Brighton we've got a very large student population, and Nigel Carter, who's the PPC for Brighton and Hove, or Pavilion I believe it is, has been up to the university and he's being absolutely murdered up there by the students. They are so brainwashed. They think we're against Europe and they love Europe. Do you think there is a message? What is UKIP's core message to young people, those people that are sort of 18 to 24, how can we get them on side? What is the best way to get through brainwashing that they've been given? And I think you probably addressed some of that with the education, but is there something that we can, a message that can grab their attention so that they come over to us?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things spring to mind. First of all, the 50% youth unemployment is always good for a bit of attention. There, you suddenly get these sort of eyes sort of shifting over. Oh, really? You know, we're basically telling them they're shackled to a very old, 1970s or 60s model of how the world should be in the EU. There's almost a sort of bureaucratic takeover without anyone really concentrating on the consequences, terribly overregulated and so on. And what we're saying is that this is not a world in which the government is the solution to everything, and that is a message which does resonate with young people, because actually they are, at least a large number of them, are more sceptical about the government's ability, any government's ability, to do the right thing for them or to bring about prosperity. So in that sense they're fertile ground for what we are, the Independence Party, and we believe in certain responsibility and avoiding situations where the young people, I think Nigel would say, are being misled in terms of looking at their futures in one way when it really ought to be another way altogether. So there are ways of approaching it. We are a self-described libertarian party, by which we mean more or less classical liberal, relatively less government and less taxation. And we try and explain that would mean, and does in other countries, mean more prosperity. And of course the younger you are, the more valuable a long period of prosperity ahead of you is.
I agree. I was at Canterbury just before Christmas. I was down there with Tim Aker, our head of policy, and Canterbury is known as the European university because of its proximity to Europe, and I reckon 50% of the audience down there were European. And they said, well, what would happen? We get grants to come over here, we get free education. I said, well, there's no reason why we can't have a reciprocal arrangement, providing that we're sending as many over to France and Italy, etc. And after that meeting, about 25% of them came up to me. And it wasn't the Europeans that were giving us a hard time. It was the homegrown variety. It was our own students, because they had been brainwashed. We challenged them. We had a vigorous debate. And a lot of them came up to me afterwards, and they were Portuguese, Spanish, Italian and Greek. And they said that they really feared going home, and they had no jobs, and they come from very middle-class families. And that's what they feared, and that's the message that we take over. And what was also interesting about going down to that debate, not one single lecturer would debate with me. And I emailed them, I phoned them, I did it on Twitter, I did a lot of social media, and not one of them would come and debate. And I hear down in Canterbury again today, not one of them would come and debate. I also, a few weeks ago, they had a democracy day, and we turned up down there, mob-handed. So there was Labour, in fact all the parties were there apart from the Greens. There was one guy from the Liberal Democrats, really no mate, standing there on his own. The Conservatives had 8 or 9 helpers, and there were thousands of students coming in and out. Labour had about 9 or 10, and we had 12. And people were so pleased that we were there. And we had some very vigorous debate, but we turned a lot of people, because what we have to do is the myth busting, because there are so many myths around us. And young people are naturally libertarian, and we are the Libertarian Party, and they're naturally against sort of imperialism, and what you've got is old 20th century, 19th century imperialism. It's just been done from a centralised area. And when you explain to them, you've actually lost your sovereignty and what that means. And you can talk back to the sort of First World War, the Second World War, and what democracy means, but you have no say, and they don't actually like that. So we attack them, we get to them on social media. And also our Young Independents, our youth wing, is the fastest growing youth wing in the country, and we've even got girls as well.
Clive, do you want to, any comment? Clive, any comment on the result of your question?
Yeah, I think you're right, because I'm trying to find what it is that switches young people on, and I think it is the libertarianism. And I've gone back to read some of those books that Nigel Farage says he was very influenced by John Stuart Mill on liberty, and I'm reading that now. And there seems to me that when I was a student back in university, years ago, that all of that stuff, you read it, and wow, this was revolutionary. So I can see a lot in UKIP that should appeal to young people if we can just get past that barrier of prejudice, because they've heard it, oh, we're racist and we're this and that, all the myths. But I think you're right, if we can explode the myths and get across the substance, I suppose it's really engaging with them, isn't it? That's the key.
It's time. I mean, we've grown. I've been in UKIP for just over 3 years now, and we had 10,000 members. Now we've got 35,000 members. We can't actually cope. But once we've got some more money, because we'll be ploughing it back into the regions, then actually, on my staff, I will have people, and I'll have young people, and I will be sending them into the universities. That will be part of their job, actually, to take their,
we could do some in Sussex, I think, because...
Well, I came down to Hove, I came down to Portslade, and I spoke down there, and I had the rabble UAF
I wasn't
in
there then, but yeah.
Yeah, there is, and again, it's dispelling the myths, the racism one. It's getting less and less now.
It is, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. And again, we say we're internationalists. We want the brightest and best from around the world. We want the brightest and best from India and China. And we've been part of the Commonwealth for God knows how long. We are a very tolerant nation, and it's getting the point about cheap Eastern European labour, because we've got an open door immigration policy, and because our NHS is free at the point of delivery, and so are our benefits as well. And once you explain that, penny drops.
Because we need to get more of them in our meetings, don't we?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, my name is Edward Thomas. I'm beginning to hear a number of Conservative voters saying that, yes, they agree with UKIP policies, but I can't possibly vote for UKIP because I might let Ed Miliband in. How do you answer that?
Shut the door.
Okay, yes.
He's only a silly kid anyway.
Right, there are a number of things to be said about this. The first thing is that there's an assumption, I think, underlying that question, that most people in UKIP are ex-Conservatives. It's really just a substitute Conservative party. This is not true, and I think it's very important people recognise that. I think that we get lots of people from the Labour Party and Lib Dems, as well as the Conservative Party, and we get an awful lot of people from the non-voting party, which I think is extremely interesting and encouraging, because what it's telling you is that we're saying something that none of the old parties have been saying for a very long time, and bringing people back into politics. So the first thing about that is that that you can't tell what UKIP's effect would be on an election anyway, as a technical fact, because particularly in the area where there are lots of marginal seats in the Midlands, we could be drawing support in all sorts of different ways, actually, and according to circumstances we could be costing Miliband seats as well. So that's the first point. The second one I would make is that you can't really rely on any of these old parties, including the Conservatives, to do what they say they will do, and in the end you actually end up having to vote UKIP in order to get UKIP.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And as I explained earlier, you've got the Folkestone seat now, which is straight fight between us and the Conservatives. So actually, if the Conservatives lose that, we get an MP. In South Thanet, you get a UKIP MP, you don't get Miliband. So there's a bit of a trade-off around that. But actually, because We didn't have the redrawing of boundaries, because you probably know it takes about 45,000 extra voters per constituency to elect a Conservative voter, Conservative MP. So the system's skewed in. I'm a bit of an anorak. I sort of did electoral reform and headed up Conservative Action for electoral reform. Who knows what will happen come the referendum in Scotland? If that's the case, then Labour, there will be more of a level playing field in England. So we have to see what happens there. I think ultimately they actually will vote to stay part of the union. I hope they do, because I think we are better together. But if you think about the past by-elections that we've had, the past 6 by-elections up in the north of England, we are the official opposition. We've come second each time. In Wythenshawe, we were the second party. There were some very nasty tricks against us. And you think about Eastleigh. 1/5 of the people that voted for us had never voted before. They hadn't voted in 5, 10 years, a whole generation. And I spoke to some people who came along to the meeting earlier. They said, we are those people. You know, we haven't voted, we haven't been engaged, but we feel motivated to turn up and hear you and what you're saying. And in Eastleigh, given another week, the media pundits and others said, you would have won it. You know, the Liberal Democrats did their job, they got their voters out, they got their postal voters, but what they're going for is snap by-elections within 2 weeks. And we made great guns over there. Given another week, we actually would have won it. And again, it was the people that were turning out to us, none of the above, and they're coming over. So, also, if Scotland votes to leave, that's more of a level playing field. If they vote to stay in, then there is, again, you'll have a hung parliament, because the people were fed up with the old parties last time. And the only reason that Clegg is Deputy Prime Minister is because he was allowed on the television to have the debate. Nigel will have the debate because he'll have his own debate. He'll have the cameras on him. He'll be providing a running commentary. And the other parties and the BBC and the media can't ignore that. So we will have our say. So it's quite extraordinary what's going on at the moment. We're the official opposition on Kent County Council, and I can honestly say, in the May elections last year, a lot of my colleagues were paper candidates. Yeah, they did go out, they knocked on a few doors, but they won with a landslide victory. We're now the official opposition, and we're taking seats. We're taking seats in Tunbridge Wells. You know, we run the East Coast. And then on West Sussex, we're the official opposition. In Seaford, a couple of weeks ago, we won 2 seats. So we're marching in, but it's not consistent where we're taking seats. We're taking Conservative seats, we're taking Labour seats, we're taking Lib Dem seats, and even people who have voted Green are still coming over to us as well. So the message is, vote UKIP and get UKIP.
I think, Mr. Thomas, do you live in Eastbourne?
Yes.
You're an Eastbourne voter. Do you happen to be a member of UKIP, or are you Conservative still? You're not convinced?
No, I'm a party supporter.
I'm
not a party joiner.
No, I understand. Just out of interest, I'm the chairman of Eastbourne UK Independence Party and the agent in the May elections of 2013. In those elections, there was a 33% turnout, and we received just over 6,000 votes in the elections for the county council in Eastbourne. And the Conservatives only received 500 more votes than us. So we're significantly challenging the Conservative Party in Eastbourne. Okay. Now, out of interest, just a few weeks ago, the Conservative Party in Eastbourne's membership's falling yet again, and in the Meads area of Eastbourne, which is the strongest part for the Conservative Party, they sought to resurrect their organisation in Meads, and they got a half dozen people along to re-elect the new chairman and secretary because they got to boost their organisation. So even from the local elections where we received over 6,000 votes in Eastbourne, on 30% turnout, if you extrapolate those figures of all the political parties in the general election, 65% turnout, say, and include a bit of Willingdon, you're looking at Eastbourne being a marginal seat for the UK Independence Party, without a doubt. There's no doubt at all in my mind that the Conservative Party in Eastbourne cannot win because we've made such inroads into the Conservative Party vote. Now, one final thing is that the Conservative Party had every opportunity in the last 20 or 30 years with the Maastricht Treaty and the rest of it to take a total Eurosceptic stance and withdraw from Europe. They failed to do that. So a commitment to continue hoping that the Conservatives will change and demand to withdraw from Europe is, I'm afraid, will disappoint you. because I don't believe it. I don't think the majority of people now who are Conservative inclined, older members, people living in Eastbourne, are convinced of that. It's sad, but true. So the UK Independence Party has to fill this field. Now, the UK Independence Party was born no less than 20 years ago with half a dozen members. We're now on 35,000 members. And the other political parties are falling in number. This, I don't want to speak too long because it's at my speakers' meetings, but the Conservative Party is in a sad state because in Scotland they've got one MP out of 57 seats. The Conservative Party do not have any representation in the major cities in the north of England at all. Now, of course, it's the SNP up in Scotland. Now, the UK Independence Party is extremely strong in the south of England and is taken away a significant number of seats from the Conservative Party in the south of England. We won 149 seats in the county council elections. There are local elections taking place in May the 22nd, at the same time as the Euro elections. There's elections in Hastings, elections, thousands of seats are up for contest, never mentioned in the press, but there are, and UKIP are making every effort to fight in every seat you can have candidates across the country, because an opportunity is there to build an organisation to withdraw from Europe. I've been a passionate supporter for the withdrawal from Europe 30 to 40 years, and I believe the time has come from this country to get out of a massive organisation which is totally undemocratic, totally unfair. Well, you know all that. Everybody in this room knows all that. There's an opportunity, a window of opportunity for us to actually win in this country. And I think an old political party like the Conservatives, an old party like the Labour Party, forget them. Forget them. They're non-entities. As our speakers have said today, the qualities of their candidates are abysmal. We've got people across the board, people who are genuine, working for a living, business people, coming to us, of all political parties, joining UKIP, say, I want to be a parliamentary candidate, I want to work for UKIP. People who are millionaires and paupers are joining us today and every day. And I'll take this opportunity, before I call on another speaker, to say that if anybody here is not a UKIP member at all, please take an application from the back of the room and build an organisation up in Eastbourne. I feel passionately about withdrawal from Europe, and I'm sure that most of you do as well. Okay, come on, another question, please. It's very kind of you. We have two other speakers. Can I have a question? Please.
My name is Hugh Wheeler. It seems to me that if we really want a referendum, we've got to win at least 50 seats at the next general election. Because we're not going to win the general election, and I don't think anybody is foolish enough to think we're going to do that, but it's 100% certain the next government will be a Labour-led government, and we have to have influence. So I don't understand why you're keeping your policies under wraps, because I don't know what they are, apart from the fact that you don't like immigration and you don't like the EU.
Okay,
but,
I'll answer those because I am on the policy review.
Excuse me, I haven't finished my question yet. The other thing is, who is the prospective MP for Eastbourne, for UKIP?
Nigel Jones was selected in January.
Very good man. The gentleman from Lewis?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, Nigel is on our MEP list as well.
Nigel Jones was selected at Hastings in this room with a third of the membership of Eastbourne.
I thought he was going to be the MEP.
Yeah, he's down as an MEP. He's an MEP candidate as well, and he's I think he's seventh.
He was actually elected as the
No, he's seventh on the list. So he won't be elected as an MEP because the MEP elections.
The election is in May 2015.
Yes.
And I don't even know who I'm supposed to be voting for.
Well, he's very much involved with the MEP elections.
Along with your policies.
Yes.
Okay, well, we're actually fighting the Euro elections at the moment, and that's the most important thing.
No, it's irrelevant.
No, it isn't,
You
because
can't give
I've just told you 70% of our laws are over.
Winning in the European elections.
Let me tell you what the timetable is.
In the UK.
I'll tell you what the timetable is. We work hard up to the 22nd of May to get MEPs elected, and we're fighting on the EU, immigration and energy policy. Those are the three main categories that we're fighting on. Then, as soon as that's finished, we will publish our general election manifesto, and we will have all of our PPCs in place. And so on May the 23rd, the general election campaign starts.
So you'll publish it on the 23rd?
No, not necessarily, because no other party's doing that. No, we will start talking about certain policy issues. We don't suddenly publish, no party will do that. So we'll start talking about tax, welfare.
Perhaps we should be different.
Well, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. No, from a PR point of view and a press point of view, you don't suddenly publish a whole manifesto until it's the start of the general election. What you do is, week one, you might say, right, our policy on tax is going to be X, and there'll be weeks of discussion around that. We have to come back, the other parties have to come back, there'll be counteraction. Then we talk about welfare. I've written the welfare policy, so I know what's sitting in there. It's all been costed, and then we have that argument, or that discussion, and that will carry on for weeks, and so on and so forth. And that's what Miliband is doing at the moment, is giving you a flavour of what they're thinking. They haven't costed anything, it's a flavour of what they're thinking. And Cameron is giving you a flavour. Last week it was, oh, I think wind farms are absolutely useless and we're not going down that route now. Well, what about all the subsidies, the billions of pounds worth of, 1,000 billion that's already gone into this? So that's all irrelevant. That's taxpayers' money that's just been thrown away, Mr Cameron, since 2010. So that's what you do, and that's what we'll be doing. And we need to get MPs into Parliament. And actually, I want to come back on one thing. It's not a fait accompli that Miliband is going to walk into number 10. If you actually look at the polls, they're closing, because we're squeezing the vote as well. And the more successful the economy becomes, and we know it's grown by another 5%, etc., but we still got to go across that there is £1.4 trillion worth of debt. You know, it's my unborn grandchildren that will be paying that off. So we've got to have the economic argument. I mean, it might be all very rosy out there and that, but it isn't. We've still got 3 million people unemployed. What are we going to do for the 1 million unemployed youths who are in the ages of 16 to 24? How do we get them off the dole? And is it acceptable that we actually have 3 million people unemployed? That's totally unacceptable. So all this takes time to actually roll out as well. And at the same time, we'll be campaigning to have our referendum. And we'll be saying, do you trust Carstyle and Dave to deliver? Well, sorry, Labour's had 13 years to reform. Reform was never, ever on their lips. It was their man, Brown, that snuck in through the back door, signed the Lisbon Treaty, finally signed our sovereignty away, snuck back out again, and then Miliband has got the cheek to say, oh, we got it a bit wrong in immigration, and we got it a bit wrong, and actually we'll reform. Sorry, you're a liar, we don't believe you. We know exactly where the Lib Dems stand. So there is everything to play for in the generation. It isn't a fait accompli that Miliband will be walking into number 10.
Emma?
Well, no, I think it's worth pointing. I've just confirmed really. I mean, my assumption has been until recently that Miliband probably would, but I think it's becoming much less likely all the time, and which surprises me. I mean, he does still have a residual advantage in terms of needing to have a smaller share of the poll and so on. But this election is looking more and more as though it might be up for grabs, and I think that UKIP's having decisive influence on the way all parties are thinking about it, and we have to manage the way that we introduce our ideas and policies to make sure that goes on being the case.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say something on maybe might help address your question, is that I believe that these European elections are very, very important, because if UKIP win, if we come out on top, it's going to send a very strong message to the other parties, to the nation, that we are a viable party. And what a lot of people are not aware of, and what we do not see in the press in this country, is that the Europeans are actually starting to rebel against the EU. And there was a Gallup poll, I think in September of last year, that showed 70% of Europeans no longer trusted the EU. The French are taking to the streets in the hundreds of thousands against EU policies. You've got 92% of the Portuguese do not trust the EU. So I think what we're seeing is maybe another cycle of history where the whole of Europe is starting to go through a change. And it happens every now and then that things shift radically. And I believe that this country is moving in that place. I think UKIP's going to win next year. I think the momentum from Europe, it's going to springboard across there. The students are going to start coming in on our side. And I think we're capturing that momentum. We're putting over a dream to people that England can be a great country again. And I think that spirit is starting to come back. And once that momentum gets going, once UKIP have won the European election, elections, we're taking all the council seats, we could easily win a couple of by-elections, and I think we're shaking the country up. And I think we're going to win. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that the Tories or Labour, I think they're in for the biggest shock of their lives. I really do. I'm absolutely convinced.
The problem is that the this election you asked me. Yeah, the problem is with this election coming up is that nobody knows really what the hell they're doing in Brussels anyway. And it's a sort of a nebulous thing. And one of the aims of UKIP is to get the darn thing out of the way completely, so we're no longer in it.
Yeah,
so
right.
we're not messing around with people, Rumble-Tum, whatever he calls himself, who we don't know what they're doing, and also, you know, the so-called management side of it. What secretary is doing what money they're taking from us, and once we get that out of the way, then we can start doing our policies, which I think is true. Yeah?
Yes. Well, I'll just point out one thing, but let's assume, and it would be nice, by the way, that UKIP do what the Liberal Democrats couldn't do in 100 years and start from nothing and win a general election outright, okay, under first by the post. Let's assume that happens. Nigel told me that all we're doing is promising to have a referendum. But I should point out to you that not the same people who vote for general elections vote in referendums. UKIP could become the government and get a negative referendum. So do you realise that?
Can I ask you a question? We don't want to be...
No, okay. Can I have a fresh question, please?
You obviously don't have anything that's not going to phase.
Well, but I will answer that, sir, because actually what we have to get our point across. So if we are the party of government, and I think we'll just be replacing the Lib Dems at the moment. I may be terribly wrong, and I hope I am. But it's up to us to make the case, and it will come down to the economy and jobs, and that's what we'll argue on. And I think Nigel had won that argument in the debates, and I think the polls showed that as well. And it's up to us if we really believe in that. That's our whole raison d'etre, but we have to have domestic policies. And I said, you know, we will release those as well, and then we'll appeal to more people.
Okay.
I want to touch on a couple of things that to some might not be important.
Yes, could you give your name?
Oh, sorry, Angela Maskell.
Yes.
Obviously, I'm of a certain age. Britain isn't the country I grew up in. There's not a day goes by when I don't shout or rant at the screen or what I read in the paper. I know what, you know, the most important things we know with your party are controlled immigration and to pull out of EU. But there's things down the pecking order that I think we should get sorted, and I want your views on. First is discipline in schools, of which there is none. Bring back the cave. I'm sick of this namby-pamby governments that just, I don't know, pander to the the softly touch, and it just makes me so angry. When I went to school, attacks on children, attacks on teachers were unheard of. Now it's the norm. So that's bring back discipline in schools. I'd like to see the cane brought back and some what other do-gooders think, the Liberal left. Something else I feel strongly about. And my husband said,
What's your question?
It's not a question. I just want to say.
Let the lady speak.
No, please. Whatever people have had to say, I should have mine. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Something else I'd like brought back, and I don't suppose it will, and I want your views on, is capital punishment. Now, when it was abolished, much to my dismay, it was stated then that life would mean life. Well, that is just an absolute joke. So I want to know what your views would be. I know it's not as important as some things that you're keen on, but it's very important to me, and I suspect a lot of people like me.
Hank Moore.
I agree with you you about discipline in schools. This laissez-faire attitude that the kids are always right. You know, it's their rights. They know their rights. When they're arrested by a policeman, don't you touch me. You know, I know my rights. And that's all got rather skewed, I think. And yeah, I'm a mother of 2 kids, well, 18 and 22. They knew the right from wrong. But it's not just about the schools as well. It's about the discipline that they get from home. And again, there's a big problem in how you've got kids having kids, you know, babies having babies, basically, and lack of discipline, lack of a male role model in the home as well, because they're allowed to. They're allowed, like, it's their right to have a baby and have a baby on the state. I've sat in Sure Start centres where there's teenage girls, 16, 17, they're bouncing one, they've got another one on the way. And I say to these girls, are you with your partners? Are you with the same boys that made you pregnant? Only one was. So, well, I said, who do you think is funding your delightful baby? And they are delightful babies bouncing up and down. You can see the social workers sitting there squirming away. And I said, who do you think's financing it? What do you mean financing it? And I said, well, your baby needs feeding. I said, there's nappies, there's milk, you have a house over your head, you have a roof over your head. Who do you think is paying for that? They didn't have a clue, and I explained it's the taxpayers, and that the social workers get even more irritated. So it's got to go back, and I'm sorry to say, back into the schools to say, actually, you need to go, if you want something, you have to go and work for it, and only actually once you can afford to have a house over your head or have a baby, then you consider it. Because the rest of us have to stop at 1 or 2, or we go into our 30s now and we have babies. And what you find is you've got generations, 2nd, 3rd, 4th generations. There's people my age who've got grandchildren, great-grandchildren, not grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And I'm aghast, and actually they're still having babies as well, because they can, because the state allows it. So that's not a lecture about unmarried mothers. I wasn't married when I had my first son. I stayed with the father. We finally divorced. That's fine. So I'm not coming at it from any moralistic point of view. But actually, the moral is you can't live off others. Yes, there are people that slip through the net, but until you actually get that right, and it's got to be told in our schools, you can't have something for nothing. And actually, there should be discipline. But the European Court of Human Rights tells them something else. And because when we leave the EU, then we can extricate ourselves from the European Court of Human Rights. Capital punishment. My personal views, I flip-flopped on this one over the years. When I was in my youth, absolutely hang on and flog them. Got in my 20s, I had a different view. Got into my 30s, I had a different view.
Hang on twice.
And then, I flip-flopped on it. Because, you know, it's somebody's life that we're talking about here. I fought David Davis's 42 days by-election. So I went up to live with DD. And this came up quite a lot. He was a proponent of capital punishment, or he was. And he said, well, look, you know, now we've got DNA samples, it should be cut and dried, shouldn't it? Yes. But actually it isn't. Because, think about this, if you hire a car, go to the airport, you hire a car, a couple of other people have hired that car, but they're quite clever, they didn't leave their DNA in there because they used it to murder somebody. And actually, because you live in the south of England and near Gatwick Airport, you might be connected to that person that was murdered, but it's only actually your DNA. You can't account for where you were on that time. It's a bit more complicated than that, but if then you were hung, or hanged, as the term is, that's a tragedy, because it's your DNA.
Well, it's
so,
a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But because of that, I'm not convinced. But do you know what? Because we're UKIP, and because we do believe in localism and referenda, we give you the vote. So, you know, we believe in that. We don't believe that the people that go to Westminster, for all the reasons I've explained to you, because I don't think they're representative of the people in this country, we'd actually give you the vote. So you could decide whether you want to bring back hanging or not. But I'm not going to be judgmental on that. I'll put my case, but it's up to you to decide.
Well, perhaps if there was a threat of hanging, perhaps people would behave a bit better.
Sorry, on education, I mean, I think Janice has said quite a lot of it already. I mean, the enemy in a way is political correctness. We are the not politically correct party, which is an extremely good thing. And political correctness is sort of almost a semi-religious view that if you say nice things and stop people from being nasty, then the world will all be wonderful, regardless of any kind of underlying responsibility or reality. And the European Union, I'm afraid, is the font of this. and often to be found actually funding groups that believe in it. The other group that's to be found funding political correctness groups is, of course, the government, which is to say the taxpayer. So there's a huge nexus of people, including students at universities who want to go and work for these people, who are all running the same game. It's unsustainable. I got the same feeling about this that Nigel has expressed about the European Union, which is that actually both of them will have to collapse in the end. Our task is to manage it, actually, in the best possible way. So a lot of it's about individual responsibility. We're certainly in favour of it, and in fact you can't have responsibility without some sort of consequences for people who are not being responsible. It's extremely difficult in practice to do it, and I sympathise with Janice having to write our welfare policies, but I'm sure we're on the right lines. On the death penalty, I'm not sure about anything, except that I haven't been asked that question before, and I'm delighted that Janice suggested that we'd have a referendum, because that's what I was going to say. Because it's worth pointing out that in a number of cases, and fox hunting, for example, is another one, this is our view, that we say that different parts of the country, or even the whole country, depending on what's appropriate, can take a view that things should be devolved down to the people and not left in the hands of professional politicians.
Absolutely. Is anybody else had an answer question? A new question, please. No? Yes.
Without leaving the EU, how would you go about this? Would you renegotiate and say, go on to Article 50, or would you repeal the Economic Communities Act of 1972?
There's two ways of doing it. Our preferred method is to invoke Article 50. And we want to be good neighbours, and we want to be good partners with our European friends. So it'll be Article 50. And then you have a 2-year negotiation period where we negotiate free trade agreements, because we can have free trade agreements tomorrow if we left the EU. If they're very difficult, and I don't think they're going to be terribly difficult, because the French have got wonderful cheese and wine, and you may like their cars. I prefer German cars. You know, there's the white goods manufacturers of Italy and Germany, and a whole plethora of other things that we want to import and we enjoy. So, you know, they're not going to want to completely divorce us. Norwegians still would want to trade with us, so would the Swedes, so would the Danes, and you know, we've got a lot of political allies within in the Dutch as well. So we've got a 2-year period. If it doesn't work, and we don't get what we want, and actually the people may decide that actually don't want to come out, so we can invoke Article 49 then, and we can go back in again. I don't think that will happen, but that is an option, but I don't think it will happen. Or we could repeal the Communities Act and we just say, no, we're leaving and we're going now. So, yeah, there's 2 ways of doing it. We'll see how the negotiations go.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Nigel Farage said that we would behave ourselves as long as they did, I think. And therefore you
Sorry,
start...
Alan, could you speak up? Just
Sorry, yeah, I think Nigel said we would behave ourselves so long as they did. And therefore that we would go along with the 2-year period in the process and so on, but with the ability to just leave by getting rid of the European Communities Act anyway.
Okay.
Would you be of the same reason as me in the fact that a few years ago I was in a party at the embassy in Rome. I spoke to the diplomat there. My niece was a secretary, and I was talking to the guy about Rome and that. He said it's simple. He said they make a very big issue of it, about this, that, the other. He said, but really, he said, I forget the ambassador's name, the 2 ambassadors' names, but he said the English ones only really got to go up to him, cancel the Treaty of Rome, and that's more or less it. Your Maastrichts and all them are just paragraphs added on. The European Union was funded on the Treaty of Rome, and if the Treaty of Rome's cancelled, it wouldn't be such a great big performance like a lot of people make out about pulling out, you know, closing the Europe and start running ourselves. We can still trade with them, but run our own place.
It's really quite simple, because what Lisbon did, it hoovered up all the anomalies and basically then transferred all sovereignty. So and the Article 50 is very simple. We just
is that Treaty of Rome, the Article 50?
No, it's part of the Lisbon Treaty. It's actually called some long-fangled title, which is I might have here, but I don't want to bore you with the
But
details.
they've all
It's
been
just
added to the treaty of Rome.
well, no, Lisbon consolidated everything. It basically became a constitution. So Maastricht and everything that went before it went into there. But we can either go down the Lisbon Treaty route of Article 50, or we can repeal the European Communities Act. It's quite simple. And then we negotiate. So just to leave, we can leave. But actually we prefer to have it may not even take 2 years, but we have a 2-year window to negotiate. And because we do want to trade with them, and we want free trade agreements, not just with Europe, but with the rest of the world as well. We want to be good neighbours. Because we actually recognise there are 4 million jobs, they're not our jobs. There are 4 million jobs, and actually, you know, we will say it's more beneficial for our people to be outside of the EU as well, the economic cases that we've got to make, because the same NIESR report said actually we will gain jobs, there will be more jobs created and GDP will go up if we left Europe. So there's a lot at stake. We want to be good neighbours, we don't want to leave them high and dry.
Well, if we come out, we straight away save quite a lot of money, don't we?
Yeah, we could do.
Hello. Before we finish, Amanda, would you like to pass we'll have a short collection, if we may, to pay for the room. So, could you arrange it, Amanda?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Is there any more questions from fresh speakers?
Yes, we're paying £54 million a day to Europe to be a member of, shall we say, a club. Does that mean to say if the other 26 members are paying 54 as well?
They all pay different amounts, I believe.
We're one of the net contributors.
So why are we paying more than anybody else?
Because we're stupid.
Well, I know we're stupid, yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, but just to answer that one, I mean, for a long time, the European Union worked on the basis that there were only 2 net contributors, overwhelmingly Germany, which it always has been, and to a very considerable degree ourselves, even after Mrs. Thatcher's rebate. Over time, as we've got more Eastern European and Southern members, some of the other northern states, like the Dutch and even marginally France, have become contributors on a very small scale. But I mean, basically, it's still the British and the Germans. And one of the problems is that everyone else thinks that Europe's such a good idea because their politicians say, well, we're getting 55 million a day, you know, so why complain? And that's certainly what people in Spain would say, at least until recently.
I would say on that one, Tim Condon, Professor Tim Condon, who's one of Thatcher's wise men, who's now one of our economists, he actually did some number crunching, and the numbers have actually gone up to even what he reckons is about £63 million a day. And then the old parties will then talk about the money that comes back, so the rebate in the form of common agricultural policy, subsidies, and also regional subsidy. But as he states, and other institutions and think tanks have also stated, there's very little benefit that actually comes back to the consumer, to you, the taxpayer. In fact, actually, I think the Institute of Economic Affairs estimates that common agricultural policy costs every family about £1,200 a year. And then you've got EU energy costs. When Miliband was Climate Change Secretary, what an anomaly that title is, which we will be abolishing, by the way, that's put 30% of green taxes on our energy. So we've got pensioners now choosing between heating and eating. So it's not just the 63 million quid a day that goes over there, because it's gone up, we've redone the calculations. It's all those hidden costs as well, of extra taxes that have been imposed upon households, where it's about another £120 a year to heating and lighting your house. And you know, most of that is going on useless wind farms. And that's without common agricultural policy, that's without reform of common fisheries policy as well. And we would actually have a 200 median nautical line around our coast, so we get our fishing back, which has been decimated. We get our stocks back from fishing, because, you know, if you go and buy Harry Ramsden's fish and chips down on the seafront, you're going to not get change out £10. Now, I can remember when it was cheaper than that, but our seas have been raped by the rest of the EU, and we're saying no, because most of our fish goes down to France. You can't get spider crab now, they're not sold in this country, they're caught here, sold in Spain, and then sold back to us. So the cost of that is enormous. So it's not, it's the unhidden cost, it's not just the 63 million quid a day, it's all the hidden costs as well.
While we're talking about the sea, why don't you use the sea for energy rather than wind farms?
Well, there's an interesting statistic on that one. In Kent, where I live, you've got the Thanet offshore wind farm down there. Now, we're not opposed to wind farms. We're not opposed to wave energy, but what we're opposed to is the subsidies. Now, down there, I think we've got about 100 of the windmills out in the blot on the landscape. That's created jobs. You know, there's the green jobs that were coming. Do you know how many jobs there are actually down there? 21. 21 permanent jobs that's created. The things were made in Denmark. They're owned by Sweden. And there's a £6 million subsidy per annum for those 100 windmills. And so each job that's been created, and there's 21 jobs, that's £3 million per annum per job. Is that worth it? Yeah. We're saying, great, have them. Don't have a problem with renewables, but let's have a level playing field on this, because they are only generating 0.5% of our electricity, and I don't think that's worth you paying 120 quid a year on your bills.
Okay, is there any fresh questions at all? Okay, I would like to thank Alan Stevens and Janice Atkinson. I'd like you to join me in thanking them both for coming.